Welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. I interview leaders, experts and business professionals from around the world who are bringing leadership principles and know-how into the digitally driven 21st century workplace, with focus firmly on the how-to rather than the what. Each episode is in aid of a charity chosen by my guests, and since 2020, we've made donations to over 80 global and local causes. Today I welcome Major General Robert W. Mixon Jr., US Army retired, to the Rethink Leadership podcast. He is the former commander of the 7th Infantry Division and now a leadership expert and best-selling author of The Power of Being All In. After his Army career, he led both manufacturing and non-profit organisations, giving him practical insight into leading through uncertainty and transformation. He now advises businesses across the US and teaches executive leadership at Washington University and SMU's Cox School of Business. We discuss Robert's leadership career in the military, in the private sector, and in the third sector, providing a unique lens into what makes great leaders and why adaptive leadership transcends sector, institution, and individual. This episode is in aid of Charities for Vets, as a thank you to Robert for joining us, a charity ensuring America's bravest heroes get access to charity contributions they need in full. Robert, thank you so much for joining me. Please introduce yourself, your illustrious career, and how you help leaders and organizations now.
Well, thanks, Jeremy. I'm Robert Mixon, and I had the great privilege of being senior officer of the United States Army through a course of 33 years, a corporate executive in for-profit, not-for-profit companies as well, family-owned, and learned a lot through that journey as well. And for the last 10 years, I've been the owner of Level 5 Associates, a company that helps individuals and teams grow leaders who get it.
Thank you very much for that, Robert. And I have to congratulate you on your book, The Power of Being All In. And I would like to get into that a little bit now with you. Why did you write it? And what are some of the examples or stories that will resonate with those leaders tuning into this?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. The Power of Being All In is basically a story of adaptive leadership and how effective leaders adapted to the tremendous chaos that emerged in our world over the last 5 or 6 years, as all of us, I think, are well aware. I had written an earlier book called We're All In, The Journey to a World-Class Culture. And there I had talked about the 5 levels of culture, just as though, which I think are similar to the 5 levels of leadership that I've always admired. But I felt as though the transformative times that began about 5 years ago now demanded transformational leadership. And so that's why I wrote The Power of Being All In. And I interviewed over a dozen other executives who had been through this crucible and asked them to tell their stories. And so the book also contains a number of interviews with those individuals from across the business sectors about their experiences and what they learned. And then, of course, the book goes into, okay, well, what do we do with this? We've been through this crucible. We've had these stories of success and some of failure. I've been on a journey for 40 years where I have made, I think, every leadership mistake you can make. And, what have I learned and what have we learned and what's in it for you? What can you take away to become a more adaptive leader and to use the big 6 principles that I've developed through the help of many others to be adaptive to the world we're in? And not try to be a leader in a world that's no longer the world we're in, and therefore you're not going to be relevant to it.
And based on the interviews that you did with the 12 leaders there, you don't need to name names, but were there any lessons that came out that would be useful for those tuning in around what adaptive leadership is all about?
I think so, Jeremy. I think, the lessons learned here are that, first of all, servant leadership is adult work. And in being adaptive, you have to be an effective listener. Then you have to be an effective learner. all those two, I mean, they're correlations, but the interviews brought that out in I think, graphic terms as to how important it is. The big 6 principles that I've developed basically are just that. They're principles, but the application of the principles is where the interviews with the leaders that I talked with, they clearly indicated that the application of those principles was the game changer for them. It allowed them to be the calm in the chaos as they led their organizations through this chaos of uncertainty, of disease, of war, of social unrest, and all of the many conditions that still exist today in that regard.
So you can't leave me hanging here, Robert. Is like we know that these 6 principles are key to adaptive leadership. So what are they?
Okay, I was going there. Thanks, Jeremy. The first one is set your azimuth. You know what people ask me, what's an azimuth? Well, the azimuth is your true north. It is the cardinal direction of yourself and your organization. And you do that by developing 4 key components of the azimuth. What's your mission? What's your intent? And that's more specific than vision, because intent is really a crystallization of the mission into a measurable end state, the key tasks you have to perform to get to that end state, and the why. You know, why are we doing this? The third component of the azimuth is, what are our values? What do we believe in? Our beliefs. And the fourth element of the azimuth is, okay, based on those beliefs, what are the expected behaviors that we are going to demonstrate to bring those beliefs to life? So the first principle, set the azimuth, has those 4 components in it. And that's true personally of you as a leader, because the first person you have to lead is you, as well as your team. The second principle is listen. My mom told me, God bless her, she's 93 now. She said, Robert, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Did I pay attention to that? Nope, I didn't. But over a period of time, smarter people nudged me in the right direction. And as the famous adage goes, I'm learning to listen with the intent to understand and not the intent to reply, as in the Stephen Covey model. I think 95% of us don't listen with the intent to understand. We listen with the intent to reply. What's a classic example? Interrupting people. Classic example. And leaders do this all the time, and then they wonder why people are irritated with them and feel that, they're not listening. Well, they're just not listening with that intent to understand. The third principle is trust and empower. Empowerment demands that if you're going to empower people, you got to trust them. But you have to manifest that empowerment. You have to manifest it in a meaningful way. And I think, delegation is one of those key elements of demonstrating trust. There's risk. It's risk to it, involved, and adaptive leaders have to understand and manage risk. But again, when you set the azimuth, listen, trust and empower, now you have 3 of the key pillars of being an adaptive leader. The fourth component is do the right thing when no one's looking. And as we used to say in the Pentagon, that briefs well. Oh yeah, we're all going to do the right thing all the time. Yeah, well, I drove to work this morning here in one of the main streets in Melbourne, Florida, and I would say that the speed limit of 40 miles an hour is a suggestion. And there are a whole lot of people who say they have all the right values that were blistering by me at about 60 or 65 because they had a selective determination of what right looks like. I think we as adaptive leaders have to understand that everybody's watching, and doing the right thing when no one's looking may not necessarily be captured in the speed limit, but it's captured in your approach to walking the talk, because people are watching. The fifth component is when in charge, take charge. That doesn't mean you're loud, profane, abusive, or listening with the intent to reply. Being in charge is being the calm in the chaos. It's being that person who is able to take bad news and take it in a reasonable way, and then act upon it from a learning standpoint and not a blaming standpoint. Think about this question, Jeremy. When something goes badly, there are 2 ways to approach it, and I've been in both scenarios. The first one is, Robert, what were you thinking? The second question is, Robert, so what did we learn? The greatest leaders I've ever known, great leaders like General Colin Powell, who I had a chance to work with, and a wonderful privilege in my life, he would ask that second question. He wouldn't say, Robert, what were you thinking? He would ask, okay, Robert, what did we learn? That's the power of positivity, where adaptive leadership lives. The sixth principle is balance, the personal and professional. I hear people talk all the time about time management. You can't manage time. Time is finite. What you can do is take more ownership of the time you have available. Adaptive leaders do that. They understand that time has four components to it. And the four components are in terms of energy, not hours in the day. We have four levels of energy inside us. We have physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental. Those four components, if we nurture those energy levels in ourselves and others, give us the ability to have balance in our lives. So we need to understand that in the adaptive leadership environment we're in now, those levels of energy are the key components of being able to bring the other five pillars, the other five principles to life, but we have to actively nurture them. So that's really a snapshot, a Happy Meal version of the big six principles, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. And as you're going through it, Robert, it's clear these are entirely human-centered.
Yes.
For self, how we interact with others, how we interact ourselves when no one's looking as well. I think that's a really great one, actually, is that do you walk that talk as a principal or just when the cameras are on, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we'll come back to a number of these as we go through the rest of this, because I'd like to come to your unique perspective. You have a military background, but you now work in the corporate and public sector landscapes. You can see all sides of the fence, really. So in today's business landscape, where things are a little bit different, let's say, to the institutions like the forces, how can leaders use presumably a lot of the big six principles like you do in the forces to foster a level of all-in mission-driven commitment without necessarily having the structure or the discipline that you may have had in the military?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Jeremy. I grew up in what I call the culture of compliance. We did what we were told to do when we were told to do it. And there was no real discussion of why. I think today we have to live and foster a culture of commitment where we are all in. The way you get there is you have to start by leading yourself. When I'm coaching my individual leaders or my teams of leaders, we start with the first person you have to lead is you. In the words of one of my, I think, wonderful colleagues, Brigadier General Becky Hallstatt, who wrote a book called The First Person You Have to Lead Is You. We start there and we say, okay, what is my mission statement? My personal mission statement. Who am I? What do I do? Why do I do it? So we start with that personal mission statement, and then from that personal mission statement of 2 or 3 sentences, we develop a personal leadership philosophy. Okay, what do I represent based on that mission? And in the book, The Power of Being All In, I have put my personal leadership philosophy in the book so that everybody could see, okay, I had to learn this. I had to develop it over iterative, sessions, and you're not going to do one draft final copy. But I started with setting the bar on who I am, what I represent, and then putting it out there for everybody else to hold me accountable. I think when senior leaders do that, go through that process for themselves, whether we do it one-on-one or in a collective setting with a team, there's really a revelation that occurs when most people realize that they don't really know who they are yet or what they want to be when they grow up. But establishing that framework now gives everybody else the opportunity to buy in to the fact that, hey, we can be in a culture of commitment. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to learn. As Amy Edmondson talks about, the psychological safety concept. And I think that was a brilliant capture on her part. We want to create a culture of psychological safety, but we have to be vulnerable to do that. And we start with a personal leadership philosophy, and then we build an azimuth for our team with those 4 components: mission, intent, our values, and our behavioral culture. And that becomes our true north that we commit to. And I think that's where adaptive leadership really, really can take you to the next level as an individual and as a leader.
Yeah, regardless of sector, actually, from what you're saying there, particularly starting at that point with the personal mission statement. I like what you said about that's a real great opportunity for others to buy in, because you're putting yourself out there. You're vulnerable, you're showing a bit of courage, we're open, we're in this together, rather than I'm your boss and you do this and so on, right? Because some leaders are still like that.
Yeah, they are, Jeremy. And it's unfortunate because the culture of compliance is very limiting. It I think creates a culture where people see themselves as what I call in my earlier book, the name tag culture. You're a leader because your name tag says so. I don't know why people wear this sales manager on their shirt or production manager. I bet they tend to do that. If you're the leader, I don't think people need to read that on your shirt. They will know that by who you are and what you represent and how you approach the process of leading. Because leadership is art, not science. And I think those leaders who are most effective go far beyond the name tag to representing the mission and representing the values and their behaviors, model or bring those values to life. And people want to belong to the organization that they're in. We are tribal creatures from our primeval times, Jeremy. We are tribal creatures. We want to belong. But we need to belong to someone that we respect and to some organization whose mission we respect. And that's where you go from the culture of compliance to the culture of commitment. But it doesn't happen in 30 days. You have to make a commitment to do this over a period of time. And that's why when I work with leaders and teams, I tell them up front, look, this is a journey, not a destination. And we're going to have to be in this for a couple of years if we're going to take our culture to a new level of commitment. At least a couple of years. It's not going to happen in a couple of days. We're not going to download a recipe book, from the internet and just, 2 cups of sugar and 2 cups of flour and 2 cups of attendance and 2 cups of accountability, and there we have a culture of commitment. It's art.
Yeah, you were exactly. I was just about to reinforce that. It's not a science, it is art. And to be good at that as an artist, you need practice, you need to be consistent, you need to do that every single day and live and breathe it and learn when you make mistakes, like you were talking about before.
Yeah. What did we learn?
Yeah, exactly right. Now, you are somewhat unique as a guest for me, Robert, because you've led the 7th Infantry Division, you've led a manufacturing firm and a non-profit. So that's kind of 3 very different sectors. So I'm sure, and we're talking about vulnerability here, personal statements, you talked about some of the things that you got right and wrong earlier in your career.
Mostly wrong early on.
But we've all been there, right? But I'm very interested to know what the hardest leadership sort of reflex has been as you transferred across these sectors, that you had to either unlearn, relearn, or completely change when moving from a structured institution like the US Army to company corridors and then through to the 3rd sector?
Well, the Army's transformation really informed a lot of my leadership perspective as I went in the corporate sector. When I was a young officer in the Army, we were in that culture of compliance. And in the early 1970s, for example, I was a platoon leader of 42 soldiers in Germany. And we went through a period after the Vietnam War where we attempted to change the Army on the move, as we would do later more successfully. But in this first case, it was very awkward we had an army of draftees, and we ended the draft in 1973 and went to a concept called the volunteer army in our United States Army. And so I had 42 soldiers out there patrolling the east-west German border in the 11th Cavalry Regiment, 21-year-old Lieutenant Mixon. Of those 42 soldiers, half of them were draftees who didn't want to be in the Army, and the other half were volunteers that we really didn't want the Army, but we had to have, warm bodies. So I had this what I used to call it a dog's breakfast of personalities and backgrounds and levels of buy-in and things like that I had to figure out how to bring them into a cohesive organization. The good news is I had some smarter, older non-commissioned officers who helped me develop a pathway that we could get people to buy into. Although some we had to, Jim Collins said you had to, get them in the right seat, the right bus, or get them off the bus. So we had to get some of them off the bus. Later, the Army transformed into much more of a learning organization through the concept of the after-action review. That occurred in the mid-1980s as we grew an Army that was going to be world-class coming out of the 1970s, using the after-action review as a learning tool, where every unit and every mission had to go through a process of assessment of, okay, what was this mission we just did? What happened? What went well? What did not go well? What did we learn, and what are we going to do with it? And who's going to do it by when? So there was some accountability there. That really made a huge impact on me. And as we went in the first Gulf War, which was one of the classic battles of annihilation in military history, that happened because our military was very, very professionalized at that point in time. And we had gone into the culture of commitment. And so when I left in 2007, left the military from the 7th Division and went into corporate world, I had some scar tissue from those experiences, positive and negative, but I knew that a culture of commitment was very doable. In the corporate sector that I went into initially, they were compliance-based. And we went the Great Depression in 2008-9 and found ourselves, as we used to say, looking in the lion's mouth. Sales, profits, all of that had fallen off the rails. What we had to do was regroup and be able to gather leaders together and say, okay, where are we going? What does success look like? What does it take to get there? How do we set our azimuth or reset our azimuth? And as we went through that process with the leadership team in a manufacturing company and later in the not-for-profit organization I was privileged to be part of, CDS Life Transitions, I saw that it was transformative to have that awareness, to have that reset of the azimuth, and then have people, by participating in that reset, the buy-in emerged because we were persistent in following that true north. And when we got off azimuth, or got out from our intent, then we got back into it. We got back within, as Jimmy Buffett says, within the navigational beacons, right? And that kept us focused. And the numerous companies I've worked with since then, as in Level 5 associates, I've always asked them the first question when we go to get together, what's your azimuth? And many of them look like me like, well, I don't know what an azimuth is. But I have a mission statement and a vision that's written, it's in a banner behind the receptionist desk as you come into the headquarters. And therefore, we know where we're going. I said, well, I don't think so. I think that's a banner. That's not a pathway. It's not a roadmap. You have to build that roadmap. And that's been the real key for me in helping organizations and individuals become transformative and transformational in their approach to leadership.
I couldn't agree with you more. Those vision statements and mission statements that sit behind reception, full of jargon, meaning nothing to your employees, never mind your customers. It feels so old school now. We need to move to something core like it, an ambition that means something. A true north that everybody can grab hold of, right, Robert?
Yeah. Let me give you another example, Jeremy. I was working with a major automotive company, their leaders, the dealership managers, and as a senior advisor with small groups of executives. And we were talking about that azimuth and understanding the mission, that how each person interprets the mission that he or she performs every day that contributes to the greater good. And one of the dealership leaders said every day when he left the dealership, he walked out through the service bays because he wanted everybody to know when he came to work and when he was leaving work that it wasn't driven by a certain time of the day. It was when it was reasonable to go home. And he walked by the service bay, and there was a young technician cleaning up the bay after doing his work. And he asked him, said, well, what did you accomplish today? And he expected the technician to say something like, well, I did 11 work orders, and I upsold 4 components, and I improved my test process on the transmissions of these 6 vehicles. And the kid, who was about 19, 20 years old, replied very differently. He told the general manager, well, Robert, I made 9 families' lives safer today. To me, that's just a classic indicator of creating a culture of commitment, where you have your mission statement of the organization has been translated by the individual into a value proposition that he or she can bring every day and say, I'm all in.
Yeah, I'd add another seat. That's working with commitment and care, isn't it? It becomes you have those values which you've adopted due to that culture, and it means something. And therefore, a 19-year-old can say, "Yeah, I'm proud to say that these families are safe." I get that completely.
Yeah.
In many industries, be it the manufacturing industry, the automotive industry, etc., we're in a time of unpredictability and uncertainty, particularly as we're coming into 2026. And you often teach about this, and you talk about this, and you talk about that need for adaptive leadership. So when a leader is facing unpredictability and uncertainty and needs to make decisions without all the facts, from your experience, what's the first step they should take to maintain the confidence of their team, but also remain honest about the risks?
Once a leader has established his or her philosophy, and the team has established their azimuth, where are we going? I think there's a trust factor that emerges, and the leaders in their philosophy, for example, in mine, if you read that in The Power of Being All In, you'll see a statement there that says, "You can count on me," and I mean that. And I think a leader who says that has to be, accountable to it. But the team members need to understand that when a decision is made, he or she is taking the best interest of the organization into account with what he or she knows at that point in time. That doesn't mean it'll be right. That means that you may have to go back and say, okay, I screwed this up. You can delegate authority, but not responsibility. And there are times when the leader simply has to say, okay, I didn't do this well, so let's relook it. But they shouldn't withdraw from making the decision at a point in time when it needs to be made, with the information you have available and the experience you have available. And I think leaders who have that approach will have the trust and confidence of their teams, who know that they're not going to be perfect, but they're going to act within the best interests of the organization, and they're going to act within the time frame that when the decision needs to be made. That procrastination is a decision in its own right, but it's rarely a good one. I think sometimes you just have to, as we used to say in the Army, you have to move out and draw fire.
Yeah, I get that, and I think some leaders may be immobilized by unpredictability and uncertainty because they really haven't found their true selves as yet, and therefore can't communicate in a way that is meaningful to people, that says, look, I get that you don't know X, Y, or Z, but we're with you. Let's go down there. So that, like you say, it goes right back to what you said. That's the first thing. One of the first things you said, that personal mission statement that everybody can buy into, right? Yeah.
Who am I? What do I do? Why do I do it? one or two sentences. And then the philosophy that comes from that is no more than a page long, but it takes that mission and it crystallizes it into your values, your operating principles, your way of doing things, and your commitment. And then what I have done with my philosophy, because again, I've been taught by people a lot smarter than me, is I sign it and I date it so that people know I didn't write it in 2016. I wrote it, within the past year. And every year on my calendar, I have a benchmark to re-sign and redate my philosophy. And if it needs to be edited or changed a little bit, then that happens. We learn, we grow. But then it's a living document that people can see. You've put it out there, and now they're going to hold you accountable to it, and you're going to hold yourself accountable to it. That's the primary thing.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, look, I'm going to put you on the spot for the final question, which is actually a two-parter, because we're rapidly moving already towards the end of, well, not towards the end of January, but it feels like it with the amount of work I've done already. Time flies at the moment. We're staring at the 2030s ahead. So for those tuning in, Robert, what would be your 3 pieces of advice for them to go all in, which is where we started this conversation, which sets themselves apart from the rest? And the second part of that is, well, what contingencies should they have in place also before they start, particularly if they're going to be leaning into the adaptive leadership philosophy?
Well, first and foremost, I think you have to establish who you are, what you represent. That's going to be your true north going forward. And no matter how much the world's chaotic pathway takes us and yanks us around, you can always go back to that true north statement or that true north establishment. Second is, you've got to continuously work to actively listen to your team and collectively adapt to the environment that you're in. You got to be able to see yourself, see your competition, and see the business environment that you're in near real time. And that takes keeping your ear to the ground. It takes asking questions as in a meaningful way, asking power questions of your team. For example, what's the biggest challenge you're facing today? What's the resource you feel like you have the least of? And if you had more, you'd be more capable of doing what you need to do. Where do you think our weak points are today that our competition can take advantage of unless we adapt? Those power questions are part 2 of the leadership model. I think that will serve you well. And third is, establish in your own organization where the big 6 principles live, and then develop metrics so that you can measure the progress you're making towards achieving your end state, so you can achieve the key tasks. That which is measured gets done. Develop a scorecard system that's not just KPI focused, but it's cultural focused, so that you can measure the health of your culture at any point in time and then act on those areas where there's a weakness. That'll give you the ability to navigate the uncertainties, not completely or perfectly, but navigate them with confidence so that people will want to be in your tribe, on your team, creating conditions for success.
Well, I'll add a fourth to that, Robert, which is to appeal to those listening to this to go and find The Power of Being All In. Robert's book, get hold of it, get deeper into this too. We've sadly come to the end of the conversation, Robert, but thank you for being so open in your sharing. So how do people get hold of your book, find out more about your company and services, and connect to continue the discussion?
Yeah, there's really 2 great ways, I think, Jeremy, to continue our conversation. Go to Substack and look at Robert Mixon, altogether, .substack.com. There you will see the platform I've developed on adaptive leadership, and you'll see a library of video, audio, and podcast recordings where I talk about the Big 6 and the application of the Big 6. You can also there track to my website, level5associates.com, spell out the 5, and you can download Chapter 1 of We're All In and Chapter 1 of The Power of Being All In for free. You can download them and you can contact me. We can have a conversation. We can work together individually or collectively and help put you on a journey where you're going to be eminently successful, because you'll know that you're achieving excellence and you're growing as an individual and as a team in a meaningful way.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Those links will also be in the show notes for those of you watching on YouTube. They're on your screen now. So it just leaves me to say, Robert Mixon, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's a privilege to be here today with you and to share some thoughts on rethinking leadership.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. Please like, comment, and support us on your favourite platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.